Ontario's two opposition parties each won by-elections in Niagara Falls and Thornhill yesterday. That leaves Premier Kathleen Wynne's minority Liberal government in a precarious position going forward as it looks to pass a budget and avoid an early election. Joining us now to tell us what's next on the horizon at Queen's Park is Martin Regg Cohn, Queen's Park columnist with the Toronto Star. Hello again, how are you?
Good to be here, I'm fine, thanks.
Last night, busy night for you.
It was, yeah.
Okay, well, let's go through it. Thornhill, things turned out in both of these by-elections how the polls and pundits had sort of predicted, but let's go through them. Thornhill, Conservative riding since 2007. Its seat became vacated in December when MPP Peter Sherman, Conservative MPP, resigns. He had a conflict.
In a huff, yes.
Right, with his leader, current leader, his former leader, Tim Hudak. So then last night, the race is sort of seen between the PCs and the Liberals in the affluent Thornhill riding, and Conservative MPP Gila Matlow, is that how I say her name?
Marto, I think it is.
Marto. No, you're right, Marto.
Okay.
Gila Marto is elected.
Sorry, Gila, we'll get it right.
Sorry, Gila. Now that you've been elected, we'll get it right. Okay, why was she elected?
Pardon me?
Why was she elected?
So, in Thornhill, Thornhill is a special, the thing about by-elections is they're all so different, and it's always dangerous journalistically to try to draw too many inferences from them. That doesn't stop us in journalism.
I was going to say, we got to do this, Martin.
And it doesn't stop your viewers. God bless your viewers for choosing this as the issue and story of the week, because to me, by-elections mean everything and they mean nothing. So you can't extrapolate too far. But in Thornhill, complicated riding, it went Tory in 2007 with Peter Sherman, in part or in large part because of faith-based funding for schools in a riding that has more Jewish voters than probably any other riding in Ontario, certainly in Ontario and possibly in Canada. So the fact that Stephen Harper, as Prime Minister, went to Israel in the middle of the by-election, not deliberately for this, didn't hurt in Thornhill. So that also helps. But it is an affluent riding. It is a riding that Sherman worked very well. I thought there might actually be a little more resentment or feeling among some voters that Sherman was hard done by because of the way he and his leader parted company. But it didn't happen. And she's a good candidate, too. The Liberals, I thought, would do a little better, if only because they have a strong local candidate. Again, in by-elections, it's not like a regular election where the leader and the national or the provincial campaign carries the day and you're swept by a particular provincial trend. Local candidates matter a lot, and I thought the Liberals, with a high-profile local councillor, would do better, and they didn't.
What did they do? How did they come up?
They came out short. They came 2,000 votes short in Thornhill. So that's not a humiliating defeat for the Liberals, but it's a comfortable margin for the Tories, and yeah, they did well. Okay,
so Niagara Falls, more working class. Seat emptied last September when Liberal MPP resigns. Last night, NDP MPP Wayne Gates wins. This is a riding that Martin had been Conservative for many years, I think up until
2003.
2003, and then Liberal for just over a decade. How did the NDP last night manage to take this one?
Well, I'll try to be as objective as I can. They had, first of all, as you say, it is a working class riding. Tim Hudak and the Conservatives of late have been talking down unions. They have been talking down the influence, they believe, disproportionate influence of unions. So that's not a very receptive audience for that message. But to your point about Niagara Falls and the problem I had with by-elections generally, Niagara Falls is one of only about 3 bellwethers in Ontario. As goes the riding, tends to go the province in a general election. So yes, it was Liberal since 2003 as part of the Dalton-McGuinty sweep. You remember Dalton McGuinty?
I do.
A forgotten character.
I know, this is the name that should not be said by some people anymore.
Well, the Liberal candidate in particular in Niagara Falls refused to try to make him the invisible man, but it didn't work because the ghost of Dalton McGuinty was still looming there. That's one of the reasons they went down. But before that, in 1995, it went Tory, part of the Mike Harris sweep. Remember him. And the candidate who won in Niagara Falls in 1995 until 2003 was the candidate again, this time, don't ask me his name. And he probably will run again, I think, in the next general election. So, and by the way, in 1990, it went NDP, okay? So with the Bob Rae sweep, you remember Bob Rae?
I do.
Then NDP Premier.
So far, so good. I remembered everyone you've mentioned.
I don't mean you, I mean our viewers, and I'm being facetious. So it's a bellwether. So let's not read too much into it. Also, it was a narrower margin. About 1,000 votes was the amount by which the NDP beat back the Tories, and the Liberals were trounced. They did badly, no question there. I don't think the Liberals were humiliated in Thornhill. They did pretty well. The person who I think was humbled in Niagara Falls was Tim Hudak, because A, it should have been a Tory victory, given that they held that seat for several years, and it was their candidate again, who is also a local councillor and has high name recognition. Also, he's from Fort Erie. That's his hometown. It's his home turf. His own riding is right nearby in Niagara Falls, in the Niagara region. So I think this one hurt. If you're going to be the government in waiting, if you're the default option for voters who are disenchanted with the government in power, they ought to come to you as the official opposition, the strong second-place party. Instead, Niagara Falls went NDP, and that's a problem. Now, there are all kinds of explanations that the Tories are offering. Unions came in, busting boots on the ground, and so on. But still not good optics.
Okay, we are going to talk about what these by-elections may or may not say about the three leaders in just a minute, but I just want to take a step back again. I know you say that by-elections on the one hand mean nothing and on the other hand mean a lot, but the campaigning leading up to the by-election may say something. What did you think about the approaches the three parties took to the campaigning? Because there was a lot going on during this campaign.
I agree, and that's the everything part about by-elections. They can be a dry run in some form. So, for example, the Liberal Premier, Kathleen Wynne, went out on a 4-day campaign-style swing across the region just on the eve of the by-elections. Didn't work. Maybe it brought up the vote at the last minute, but not high enough. So I think they have to be disappointed. And if you were watching her on election night last night, she did not look, she looked subdued. She looked a little downcast, as if she was a little disappointed that she thought she'd do better perhaps in Thornhill. They knew they weren't going to get Niagara Falls. I think the surprise for the other two parties is that, and one of my frustrations as a journalist, is that they actually stopped talking policy in large part. They just moved to generalities. So, for example, the Tories stopped talking about their one of their pillars of their ongoing campaign, which is to try to deal with labor issues, not just right to work, but worker choice generally, the way union dues are used. Stopped talking about it to avoid doing any damage in Niagara Falls. The NDP also kind of went underground with policy. There was a big debate, a big decision about minimum wage in the last few weeks. Not a word from the NDP. Normally, they can't say enough about the minimum wage. This time, they went low because they believe small business is an important part.
Strategic, though, when it comes to politics, not to do that.
I guess, but I would have thought that, so what I think has happened is that there has been, amongst all three parties, in this kind of phony war that we have in the by-elections, it's almost has suspended the normal debate that we would see. Another thing that happens in by-elections is that, I should say, this sort of pre-election fever that we have, and we can talk about what this means for a potential spring general election, or perhaps later, let's not get hung up on the spring, is that there is this pre-election scrutiny that is being applied to all three parties, which is a good thing, but it makes all the parties a little gun-shy in some ways.
We will talk about whether or not you think there's going to be a spring election in a moment, but let's stick with the messaging and tactics that we saw during the campaigning in the by-election. Is it a precursor? Are we going to see the same style, same kind of tactics when there is a general election? Not
in the case of the Tories. I do think, and we saw again already this morning, Tim Hudak had a news conference on the morning after in which his first line of attack was the unions. He blamed the unions for stealing Niagara Falls from the Tories. He said, in fact, almost a direct quote, it is a PC riding. Let's not forget, it is federally also held by a Tory. So by rights, it should have gone to him. And he's mad about that happening. He's gone after working families, which is the umbrella group of various unions that has tried it historically for the last 3 elections to turn people against the Tories and have them vote either Liberal or NDP strategically. So in terms of tactics, we're already seeing out of the gate today Tim Hudak going back to his anti-union attacks and approach.
Okay, so, in simplistic terms, chalk a win up for the NDP and the Conservatives. You mentioned that Kathleen Wynne seemed subdued. I think it was the word that was what happened last night a non-confidence vote in her premiership and the Liberals?
Figuratively speaking, certainly not literally, but in some ways, yes. Look, she's been premier now for a year. I think she might have had a hope, a fantasy that after a year in power, everybody would love her. She would be like Christy Clark in British Columbia and galvanize people and score an upset in Thornhill, if not in Niagara Falls. And so look, all politicians at some level think they're going to win. They have to persuade themselves and their followers that they are on a...
You have to kind of believe it yourself, too.
Yeah. So I do think she was hoping to pull a rabbit or two out of a hat in both places. But just her body language, she just seemed genuinely, golly, it didn't happen. Talked about how I'm still premier, though, which is not the best thing to say because there's a lot of talk about whether she has a mandate. In our system, she is the premier. She does not have a personal mandate to be premier, but she, I think, is sensitive about that, and we'll have to wait and see on that aspect.
Okay, you talked about Tim Hudak. We know that there has been a challenge to his leadership before from within his own party. He's now, what is it, 2 for 9 in by-elections?
Right. Not good. And some Tories are arguing, many Tories, all Tories are arguing, well, our vote count went up in both of these ridings. Our vote count went up last summer as well when they won only one of the 5 by-elections in 2012. But look, politics is about optics, and for Tim Hudak to be not just losing a by-election, but losing it to the third place party, not just this time in Niagara Falls, but also last summer. He lost the summer of 2012, he lost in London to the NDP. Summer of 2013. Summer of 2012, they lost Kitchener-Waterloo. A Tory riding went to Catherine Fife, the New Democrat. So, look, it's not easily explained for him. What I would say about the NDP, though, this is par for the course. They are like a boutique party that specializes in by-elections. They're much more than a boutique party, but in terms of electoral tactics
So they do well in by-elections.
They do it by focusing their resources. They write off the ridings where they are not competitive. I think they had 7% in Thornhill, so they're not sweeping the province. But they're able to allocate their resources, their money, their manpower, and boots on the ground, and focus and win one by-election. So that's what they're good at. My point is you can't extrapolate from that. Look, Forum Research, which is the poll that the Toronto Star often publishes, got it right in both by-elections. It predicted both of these, the NDP and Tory victories. But Forum Research is also showing that the NDP is running third provincially, not a surprise, but that they would also actually lose seats. To her credit, Andrea Horwath has gone from 10 seats in her leadership to 21 seats, one by-election after another since the last general election. But Forum Research is showing that she would actually go down to about 17 seats or so, plus or minus, in a general election. So you can't, that's the problem with by-elections. They're lots of fun. It's a chance for voters to kick the government in the pants, but you don't, without worrying about kicking the government out of power.
Okay, I want to read something written by Robert Benzies, your bureau chief at the Toronto Star. It was written a couple of weeks ago, but he was talking about how we should interpret last night's results should they happen. Here's what he wrote. Victories by the 2 opposition parties would virtually guarantee a May election because Wynne's Liberals will be viewed as weak and vulnerable. It would be extraordinarily hard for the New Democrats to resist the temptation to join with the Conservatives in voting down the Grits budget, triggering the first election since October 2011. Still, some Labour union leaders concerned about Hudak's promised right-to-work policies would urge Horwath against forcing an election that could usher in a majority Conservative government. Agree with that?
I think we have to look at what Andrea Horwath said this morning. While Mr. Hudak came out of the gate gung-ho for an election and on the attack against unions, Ms. Horwath was much more measured, very hard to read, not talking up an election, saying that she's not part of this spring election fever. It's the other 2 leaders who are chomping at the bit. Andrea Horwath saying, you're going to see us put forward a series of demands, a series of requests of the government leading up to the spring budget. My sense is that she is really hedging her bets. I'm sorry, I wish I could give you a more definitive answer, but I don't know. I'm not sure she knows. There's no sign of NDP preparations as if they are secretly getting their tanks ready for into a battle formation. I think we have to recognize that the NDP, if they read the polls, and they do, recognize that there is not Andrea Horwath fever spreading across Ontario. That in fact, while her popularity, she has been historically the most popular of the 3 party leaders, that Kathleen Wynne also has been edging up, in fact, almost at par in some recent polls on personal popularity, and likely to win more seats. So the NDP is in a very nice perch right now where they wield the balance of power. They have to be mindful of the Labour movement, which is so terrified of Tim Hudak's strategy on Labour, that they would hold her to account if she triggered an election and it led to a Tim Hudak majority or even minority government. So she's caught between those two sides. Her problem is that walking that fine line requires, frankly, being able to talk out of both sides of your mouth. Because on the one hand, I don't mean that pejoratively, but it's hard to watch sometimes. On the one hand, she must castigate the Liberals as scandal-ridden, tired, insensitive, not listening to Ontarians. On the other hand, she keeps propping them up, and the Tories keep making fun of her for doing that.
Okay, so Andrew Horwath is weighing all this, as you say. Is there going to be a spring election, Martin?
I can't predict it.
Okay.
I waver back and forth.
You're not saying your calendar isn't marked to this date.
I waver back and forth. I'm not booking any vacation, but I'm always wrong anyway, so I wouldn't want to mislead you.
Okay, fair enough. We have about 5 minutes left. I want to shift gears a bit here because the federal budget came out Monday. Tussle between the province and Ottawa since that budget. Ottawa's overall funding to Ontario, let me read these numbers, for 2014-2015 will be $19.158 billion. That's down about $641 million from last year's allotment. Charles Sousa, Ontario's finance minister, said Ottawa is ripping off, his words, Ontario. Wynne said Ottawa is making arbitrary decisions that hurt Ontarians. Are we seeing a battle? Is this a real battle that's now going to brew between Ontario and Ottawa?
Yeah, and I think we can link this issue with what we were just talking about. In anticipation of a potential provincial Ontario election, I think Kathleen Wynne's Liberal government is very much trying to position itself as running against Ottawa. So you're hearing a lot of that. A lot of her campaign advisors used to work in Ottawa, and they're kind of, I think, enjoying this idea of turning the tables on the federal government. Whether it'll work or not is another issue, because Ontarians tend to be so quintessentially Canadian that they tend not to behave in the way that, say, Albertans or Saskatchewaners or Easterners, Newfoundlanders might behave. Ontarians tend not to get agitated about being ripped off. Are they being ripped off? Technically, yes. Ontario has had for the last few years, since the 2008 recession, an entitlement for equalization. That doesn't mean we're getting more money than anybody else. Quebec gets far more. We also continue to still send out more to the federal government and the other provinces. About $11 billion a year is the net outflow from Ontario taxpayers to everybody else across the country. Because our economy is recovering slowly, we may not be feeling it yet, but statistically it is, we no longer qualify for equalization in the coming fiscal year, and that's good news in a way. The thing is, when every other province has been disqualified from equalization, when their time was up, Ottawa always gave them one more year of transitional funding. This year, Jim Flaherty, the Minister of Finance, and the MPP for Whitby-Oshawa, said, no, I'm changing the rules. Everybody else gets transitional funding for 12 months so they can cushion the impact, not Ontario, $640 million short.
Okay, our Premier, Kathleen Wynne, not the greatest relationship with Ottawa currently. Also not the greatest relationship with the City of Toronto and its mayor. And it raises the question, Martin, to what extent are ideological differences getting in the way of governing this country and this province?
I'm not sure I would agree with that. And by the way, in fairness to her, on the City of Toronto issue, she does have a good relationship with the city, with City Council,
right.
and a very good relationship with the Deputy Mayor. And I don't know that many people who have a great relationship with the Mayor these days. Jason
his brother.
Kennedy. Yeah, his brother does.
Yes.
Jim Flaherty does. But do ideological differences get in the way? No. For example, suppose John Tory were to be mayor a year from now. Let's just, as a thought experiment. I think you would find the two of them would get along famously, despite the fact that she defeated him twice in provincial elections. So once, twice, anyway, I'm sure John Tory will correct me, but she defeated him when he ran in Don Valley West back in 2007. So I think she is pretty, she has a lot of flaws. One of her abilities is to have a conversation. And she can have those conversations with Tim Hudak, she can have them with Andrew Horwath. They don't always get along, or they don't always agree, but they do get along. And I don't think it's a block at the municipal level. Federally, I think if you observe the federal Conservative government over the last few years, they're pretty good at picking fights. They call Dalton McGuinty the small man of Confederation. Jim Flaherty never misses a chance to talk down Ontario's economy, its appeal to investors, and so on. So, yeah, there are clashes with Ottawa. I don't really see them at the city level, though.
Okay, Martin. Well, thank you. You've always got great analysis. I could just sit here and let you go for 20 more minutes.
That would be a mistake.
We will see. We will see when the election comes, but some people are saying spring. You aren't saying anything.
Hedging my bets.
Okay. Thanks, Martin.
Support Ontario's public television. Donate at tvo.org.